welcome to another edition of the Front Page. My name is Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal, and it's a pleasure to be here with you again today. And it's also a pleasure to have with me Brian Keefe, who is well known, I think, to probably many of you from his days as the chairman of the Manchester Planning Commission and is currently the vice president for government and public affairs at Central Vermont Public Service, better known as CVPS. In other words, the electric company. Brian, welcome to GNAT.
Thank you, Andrew.
Great to have you here. Electricity and electrical power issues have been much in the news lately, as I'm sure you're aware, but I guess that's part of, they're always in the news as far as you're concerned, I would imagine. But I guess just to kind of start things off, it struck me the other day that when I came back to Vermont in 1987 after being away for about 15 years or so, at that time, electric rates in Vermont were among the most expensive in New England, as I remember. And that was a source of, consternation and concern at the time, and how are we going to do something about that. Today, we're kind of in the opposite position. Electric rates in Vermont are among the lowest in New England. And I guess just to kind of get us started, what explains that shift over 20 or so years, how we went from being on the wrong end of the spectrum to the right side of it?
Well, that's a good question, Andrew. I think partly we are, in our power portfolio, we have a lot from Vermont Yankee. And at one point, Vermont Yankee might have been a little on the high side because the wholesale prices were relatively low. But over time, that has proved to be a very affordable resource. The price we pay for Vermont Yankee is about 4.3 cents, I think.
Per kilowatt hour?
Per kilowatt hour. And the market, it fluctuates based on the time of day, but call it 6 cents, because that's the price, more or less, the ballpark price for Hydro-Quebec power in the contract we just signed. And Hydro-Quebec today is somewhere around that 6 cent level. So 4 cents, 6 cents, and our in-state renewables are also very affordable. They're probably our cheapest supply of all, and we have about 20 power plants across the state. So those we are committed to those sources right now, and that's an advantage we have over some of the other New England utilities. But I'll have to say, New England power prices are high relative to the rest of the country.
Oh,
so
really?
Even though we're happy that we're very competitively priced in New England, we realize that, especially for our industrial customers, their competitors in the southeast or in down in the south, they get a better price for power down there. They have more coal.
Oh, okay.
We have very little coal in our power.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the renewable side of that portfolio then. I guess it's sort of a given that Vermont Yankee is going to go offline in 2012. At least I assume that that's the expectation, although you may want to talk to us a little bit about what the consequences of that will be. But where does the state stand with replacing that power in terms of, as you were mentioning a moment ago, the renewables, solar, geothermal, biomass, whatever the options are? Are we kind of at a point where that's kind of coming into its own as an affordable, viable option?
The renewable prices that we see, the market prices, are in, I would say, every case higher than the market price. The market being set by the price of electricity produced from natural gas in New England. And that market price, again, fluctuates by time of day, but you could say it's around 5 or 6 cents in that ballpark. And these are rough numbers. I'm not our power planner. They would skewer me if I was just throwing these numbers around. But for the general public, people have a hard time understanding those price points because they're kind of obscure. So Vermont Yankee right now, we're buying at less than 4.5 cents. Hydro-Quebec's around 6 cents. The market's around 5 or 6. It's low right now, and partly due to these new finds of gas in Pennsylvania and New York, the Marcellus, so-called Marcellus shale gas.
We should talk about that later, because I know that's a kind of controversial thing itself with the question about fracking and whether or not it's really going to pollute water supply or whatever. But
every generation source has its downfalls. That's what we find. And whether it's restarting the small hydro here in Manchester Center down at the junction, or the wind turbines on Mount Equinox that have been talked about, or the biomass plant in Pownell, or Vermont Yankee, Hydro-Quebec, Connecticut River dams, coal, you name it. If you produce electricity, even solar has its downfalls, although I think that's probably the most environmentally benign source.
All right.
It's also relatively one of the more expensive ones. So it's a trade-off, and that's
Yeah.
just the way it is. Typically in the electricity market, the lower the impacts, the higher the price. And then you get into a source like Vermont Yankee, where some people think, well, it's low carbon, it's low price. There it is.
Yeah.
It's reliable. It's 24/7. So Vermont Yankee is kind of an outlier in that regard. Some people are very convinced that it has high and dramatic environmental consequences, or public safety consequences for that matter, and others see nuclear power as the only way that we can survive carbon dioxide rises.
So what happens when in 2012 Vermont Yankee goes offline? I mean, what is the consequence to CVPS and I suppose to other electric utilities in the state going to be?
Well, there's two parts of that at least. Well, probably three parts. One is the impacts to the people that work at the plant, and that would be,
Right.
if the plant shut down, it would be devastating for the people that work there, for the town of Vernon, for Windham County. The economic impact to that area, I think, will be quite severe. It's true that there will be a dismantling time a period where it will be decommissioned and people will be brought in, will work there. Some of them will be the current employees, I imagine. I'm not an expert on this, but many of those will be brought in. They're contractors, just like when they do a refueling, they bring in contractors. There's an impact to the state budget of several $1 million, so there's another little hole, or big hole, depending on what you think a couple $1 million is.
Sounds like a lot of money to me.
So that's sort of a local economic impact. Then there's the power supply impact.
Right.
And then there's a reliability impact, a potential reliability impact. On the power supply side, the good news is that we just talked about this Marcellus shale, the wholesale power market is projected to be relatively flat going forward. So competitively wise, we think prices will go up. We think there will be more carbon. We think there will be those local impacts, but it's not quite as dramatic as we used to think from the power supply side. Although we currently have this revenue sharing agreement clause, if it continues to operate, that revenue sharing clause, in our estimation, serves as kind of a cap on prices going forward. So if you want an insurance policy against sudden rises in power, that would be a good one there. And if everybody has a different view on where power prices are going, where electricity prices are going. Our guys look at Energy Information Agency and CIRA and these groups who project a relatively sort of inflation-adjusted price for the next several years. Other people think that prices are going to go up and we need to plan for that. Well, if you think prices are going up like this, then Vermont Yankee can provide quite a hedge there. So when you talk about the value of Vermont Yankee on a price side, it partly depends on where you think prices are going to go. And then finally, I'll just mention, from a reliability point of view, this is a baseload generator located sort of in the heart of New England, and it's been we've built it for 20 years. It's operated. We built an electric system in some ways sort of around it to distribute the power from that plant. If it comes offline, there's different infrastructure considerations that we're looking at now. ISO New England does a lot of that work. Velco does some of that work, and we're looking at the implications there. Some of this may sound like kind of a new factor, a new information, and that's partly true because the reliability standards that we and the transmission companies are operating under get stricter and stricter each year. I think you probably remember the blackout that hit all of the Northeast, sort of from Ohio across New York and down into southern New England. We were spared from it. But after that blackout, the federal standards and the regional standards have just gotten tougher and tougher, so that we as a utility and as transmission companies need to plan contingencies, and those contingencies come with costs.
Does building transmission lines, is that like a really complicated, hard problem? I mean, I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago when the Southern Loop was being constructed, and that seemed like for a relatively short transmission line, there were a lot of issues that seemed to bubble up with that. And I also began thinking about this a while ago because a few years ago, Boone Pickens, the former oil magnate from Oklahoma, had an idea to build gigantic wind farms, and Oklahoma and Texas and out west, and then bring that power east. But that was kind of hampered by the fact that there weren't enough transmission lines to carry that power. I mean, is that when you say that we've built a transmission grid sort of around Vermont Yankee? I mean, how hard is it going to be to get that electricity where we want it if we're going to need to build more transmission lines?
The power lines are everywhere, of course, and we're constantly improving and maintaining those power lines. But when you swap resources, you sometimes have to rebuild, or upgrade transmission lines. The T-Bones, pick an example you just used. Hydro-Quebec has been in the paper. They want to deliver more power to Boston. Northeast Utility is interested in buying more power. To do that, they will need to upgrade the power lines. And with that, there are some real costs that can come with that. But if you have an inexpensive supply, or if you have a supply that the public really wants, like some of these wind sources, there's power lines being built in Maine right now, partly to deliver wind into the markets. So we as a society make choices, express our preferences, and then as a utility, we need to respond. And whether it's shutting down one resource or bringing on another resource, it's a constant battle to balance the system so that the electricity can run reliably, even when there are emergencies, when there's storms, when some plant goes offline suddenly. We have to plan for those contingencies. And what has happened over time is there's this thing called N-1, which is, N is the static state, not static, but the state of everything running normal. And then you say, okay, well, what if somebody comes offline? What happens then? And we plan for that. Well, we've gone to N-1, so now you're taking two systems off. And it's just getting tougher. The assumption's just getting more and more strict.
Shifting to a slightly different subject, but one that may be of great interest to some of our viewers, CVPS is seeking an 8% rate hike from the state government. I guess what goes into coming up with a number like 8%? Is that higher than normal in past rate hike increases, or is that a number where the idea is you'll try and get the idea that you're being bargained down to a lower number, or is there a real basis for that 8% that makes that kind of a number that's really would be difficult for you to go below?
Well, in a decade or so ago, probably the whole rate setting practice probably was more of a negotiation deal, where every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, the utility in the state would come up, we'd propose a rate increase, and we'd negotiate, find some middle ground, and be off with it. At least that's what the records show, that requests would be 15% and they'd settle at 7% or something like that. But more recently, our rates have been very steady. For the past decades, our rates have gone up less than the rate of inflation. I think it's over 10 years, it's been a total of about 6 or 7%. And we've had some rate decreases. Under our current regulation, we're required to file a base rate filing every year, and we're required to adjust for our power costs every quarter. So the power costs our rates went down by, I think, 1% almost, by the power cost adjustment. The base rate filing we file every year, we give it to the Department of Public Service on October 1st, and by January 1st, the Public Service Board will render a decision. And they look at everything. They send down a consultant. He looks through our books from top to bottom. The drivers this year are our transmission cost is the number one driver. That accounts for about half the 8%. The second one is the cost of power, and that's a net thing where I said earlier the wholesale price has leveled out. Well, we're surplus in power right now, partly because of Vermont's efficiency success, and partly because we sold the Connecticut River subsidiary a couple years ago. So we've been surplus in power. And several, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, when the price of power was high, that helped our customers because we had that lower price surplus. Now it's kind of cuts a little bit the other way. So that's another quarter of the adjustment. And then we've been having to rebuild our infrastructure, including, as we were speaking earlier about up in Stratton, we built a $12 million
Right.
substation.
Yeah.
The way we pay for that up front, our shareholders do, and then we get a return on that investment in our rates. And the sum total of those investment, our rate base has been going up. So that's another part of the driver. So transmission, power supply, and just these investments in the system are the biggest drivers of our.
Now, one of the other initiatives that you folks have been involved with, I've heard a lot about, and it sounds incredibly interesting and exciting, is this whole business about the smart grid. As I understand it, these smart meters, or whatever would be installed in people's homes, and I presume in businesses as well, you could adjust demand so that you could be sort of, I guess a homeowner, for instance, might run a dishwasher at 2 o'clock in the morning when power demand is very low and the price is less than it would be at, let's say, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. Is that kind of the idea, or is there more to it than that?
The providing more information to the customer, so the customer and different rate options, so the customer can make decisions like that. That's a very big part of the whole thing. You're absolutely right. Right now, customers get a single bill, get a bill once a month that tells you how much you use that month, and there's not much you can't really tell whether you Tuesday of this day or Wednesday of that day how much you used. Once you have these meters on, and we plan to change all the meters in our service territory, those meters will be able to deliver information to customers at, say, a 15-minute interval.
Wow.
So that you'll be able to tell through different mechanisms, maybe on your computer, maybe with some signal that's on a home area network device. You'll be able to tell what your usage is pretty much at the time you want to know. And with that information and with different rates, you might be able to switch loads. So you run your dishwasher at 11 o'clock at night instead of 7 o'clock at night, and you pay a different price. We have time of use rates now. I'm on a rate 11 right now, for example, where I think it's around 19 cents a kilowatt hour right now. We're taping this at whatever time it is, noontime on a Tuesday.
Right.
On Sunday, when the loads are down, when the demand is down, the price under rate 11 is, I think, around 11 cents. So guess what? On Sundays, we do a lot of laundry.
I think when the directors of GNAT hear about that, we'll be here on Sunday the next time we tape the show.
Rate 11 is an old electric rate
Right.
that's actually closed, but we have a rate 9. If you go to our website and look at our rate designs, you'll see a rate 9 that is a time of use rate. And if you are in a situation where you can switch loads, move them into the evenings or onto the weekends, you can save money. And a lot of times that's families that use clothes dryers and dishwashers.
Sure.
But in the future, it might be more with electric heat pumps. Dee's Electric here in town, Mike Kilburn, he knows more about electric heat pumps than anyone. They are right now the least cost societal heat source according to the Department of Energy. So we think that will grow, as will electric cars for that matter.
So how close are we to the smart grid becoming sort of pretty much the day-to-day reality? I mean, is this something that's right around the corner or still 5 or 6 years down the road?
Our plan is to begin installing meters in August of 2011 and to have them complete in the first quarter of 2013. So by
Wow.
2013, under their current plan, everybody will have these meters. And for some people, it's not going to be a life-changing event.
Right. Right.
My parents live up in Fairfax, Vermont. They don't use a lot of electricity, frankly. My dad knows that when you turn on the switch, the meter runs a little faster. When you turn it off, it slows down. He doesn't need a smart meter
Right.
to tell him that.
Right.
But for, we have 2 children and we do laundry, and some of the rate options will be exciting. We're looking at a new furnace and we think, well, should it be oil, propane, wood chips, wood pellets, electric? And this will give a more realistic price comparison. And in the future, electric cars. I mean, if you can plug in a car at night when the electric prices are low, when the infrastructure can handle a little more load, that's a good thing for society. It can be a good economic choice for individuals. So with more information comes more opportunities, we think.
Now, is there the one downside to the smart grid I've heard about is that there's also potential for security leaks or hacking into, if someone could hack into, I guess, your meter in some way or another if you're running it off a computer. Is that really a concern, or is that overrated as a problem?
Cybersecurity is a real concern. We think it's manageable, and there's some very smart people that are dealing with it at the federal level and at the utility level and through different think tanks. In fact, Sandia National Lab, one of the federal national labs, is embarking on a project here in Vermont up at UVM. Senator Sanders has been a big proponent of this, where they're going to look more closely at that. Vermont Technical College received a grant to look at some of those cybersecurity things. So yeah, it's a real legitimate concern, but one that we think is manageable. I mean, if you think about your bank account and go back 10 years and say, well, geez, if everybody's running around with a little plastic card that they can slip into a bank, isn't they going to rob the bank? Well, so far, I don't think that's happened. Sometimes you don't know.
Right, exactly. Although,
but my account's been safe, and we think yes, it's a legitimate concern. We think privacy of customer data is sacrosanct. We don't want to violate that privacy of data. We have a very strict rules right now for customers. We do not reveal customer data to people. We don't intend to in the future without their permission, and we are on top of the protocols to make sure it's not done inadvertently.
Well, Brian, we have a few minutes left, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the other side of CVPS, the folks who work there, and the fact that you're more than just the electric company or whatever, even though you are the largest electric utility in the state. I know there are many programs like the blood drive we were talking about before we went on the air, and a few other things that the company is involved with, and I guess I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that if you would like.
All right, thank you. Yeah, the face of our company for many of our customers are the linemen and the meter readers that come to their homes and either read the meter, restore the power. The big orange trucks that you see at, I have a little diner at the end of my street, and sometimes when I'm going to work at 6:30 in the morning, I'll see the trucks out there because those guys have been out all night restoring power here and there. I mean, power goes out. We have storms and we have trees. There's car accidents. Last year there was a pole taken out on Main Street in Manchester at about 10 o'clock at night on a Friday night, and it took I think about an hour to get it back on, which is a minor miracle in my
Well, it's
mind.
much faster than I remember. Again, going back to the late '80s, it seemed like there would be frequent interruptions, particularly after that big snowstorm that fall. Where power would go out kind of out of the blue, and it would be a while before it came back. But that seems to be much more rapid now.
We have some very strict measurements that we report to the state, and we are measured on that. How many outages? What is the duration? How long does it get put back on? So our guys work very hard at that, and it's not just the linemen, of course. It goes back to our customer service people, our scheduling people, our supply people, our procurement people. And especially when a big storm hits, you need to have all those elements. We bring in crews in advance of a storm sometimes. Christmas 2 years ago, we were expecting a storm to hit Christmas Day. We didn't want customers to be out of power for that day. We had crews that we had brought in, and they were staying in a Christmas Eve. They were in hotels over in Brattleboro waiting for the storm. It didn't turn out to be as bad a storm as we thought, but we plan ahead for that. Partly because it can be more cost effective to do it that way, and partly because customers, don't like to be inconvenienced. So we work really hard. We're very proud of our storm response. 2 years in a row, we won a national award for storm response. And I tell you, of course, these are the worst of conditions that our guys are out there, and they have an attitude and a culture to get it done. They will stay on the job until literally the last customer is on. And like I said, that rolls up into the schedulers, the customer service people, the procurement, the transportation department, the telecommunications department. It's a whole system, and everybody weighs in and gets it done.
All right. Well, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today to talk about this. electricity, I guess for years I just thought of electricity as the thing that came when I flicked the lights on, but it's a much more complicated project getting that power to your house than I ever
It's a
imagined.
minor miracle. You throw that switch and there it is. How
Illumination,
convenient is that?
It's pretty amazing when you stop and think about it. Well, anyway, thanks again for being with us
All right.
and sharing with us, and thank all of you for watching today. This has been the front page on GNAT. My name's Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. We'll see you next time.